So, welcome back to a break in the normal schedule for a bit of an announcement, although those among you who have been paying more attention probably already know about this because it has been spoken of elsewhere than on my channel, and of course it's going to be in the title anyway, so there's no use in me beating about the bush. Silmarillion Total War, which is going to be a new sub-mod being introduced to the family of Third Age sort of offspring, I suppose you could say. They are in a similar way to DAC and Reforged are, and of course there are a few other ones as well which are slightly smaller in scale, but yeah, this is going to be a new project which is going underway, and I know that J Monster is a big part of it. It might even have been his idea initially, although I don't want to necessarily put that all on him. I'm sure that there was discussions beforehand about who would be willing to come in to help, and I do know that there are a few people who have helped out with the development of Reforged in the recent past, and I believe there are also people from the DAC team who are also going to be helping out with this, so a bit of cooperation going on between various different development teams to bring this new thing to the playing public. And it does make sense. A great appreciation for all things Lord of the Rings is what binds all of these people together, of course. And Silmarillion Total War, or to give it another name, First Age Total War, would be sort of an easier way to think of it, perhaps. This is Tolkien and his works. Obviously, a lot of people, love Lord of the Rings, and many people who do get into Lord of the Rings end up really appreciating the mythos and the sheer work that Tolkien really did put into making this world, and Silmarillion is probably one of the better examples of that. Obviously going into the far past of Middle-earth and almost this mythic era where the battles were absolutely enormous, these figures of legend essentially going up against one another. And so for those of you who are really into the lore and that aspect of Lord of the Rings, this should probably be very exciting for you, because obviously, Silmarillion is home to things that are quite different from how things are in I'll call it the modern setting of the Lord of the Rings, akin to the movies. Obviously there will be several factions which no longer exist. Factions like Rohan obviously won't be there anymore, but there will be an entirely new setup of factions, an entirely new way that the game plays. And yeah, it does excite me actually, because obviously this is something completely new. Just to assuage any concerns as well, obviously when it comes to Reforged, and I would greatly assume DAC as well, development isn't really going to change on those two games. They will still start chugging ahead. So for example, the hotfix for Reforged is still going to be a thing, still going to be worked on, because obviously there is a fair amount to do in that hotfix, such as fixing the maps, and obviously DAC will have its own things as well, which they're moving forward with. So this is just going to be something which happens in addition to those things, and yeah, I'm always a fan of more variety, and this is more variety in a very big way. So a question I'm sure that many people ask is, when is this going to be happening? And the answer to that is, I honestly don't know. I don't know what the internal development system is looking like. But I would hazard a guess at saying that this isn't going to take sort of as long to get off the ground as something like Reforged or DAC did, purely because they won't be starting from scratch with Silmarillion Total War. Of course, they have a great deal of saved assets that they can draw from standard Third Age, but also, with people from the DAC team and from the Reforged team in on this as well. That means they have a huge wealth of assets to draw from. In particular, in the realm of maps, I imagine they won't really need to make a great deal of new maps, if any, because there are so many that have been made over the years for both of those submods that they can just draw from them. Obviously, again, unit models are another thing. I'm going to greatly assume that they're probably going to want to just build up their own unit models, but at the very least they won't have to start from nothing with those, which is always a good thing, because even if you're just using placeholders, it really does help with that sort of thing. So while I'm not entirely sure when this will be out, and obviously, patience, it's a work in progress, everything I say here is subject to change as well. So really, that's why I'm not going into too much details in terms of specifics. It's because, when something is in development and when something has started, things can change pretty greatly. So for now, I think it's enough to just say that this is something which is in development, and it shouldn't take as long as certain other things before you start actually seeing it in action, I would say. But it's still not something which is only a couple of weeks out. Obviously, it's going to take a little bit of time to get everything more tuned in. But I do have a few details that I can share, and that is the names of a few of the factions and a few of the thoughts regarding how the game will play in comparison to Reforged primarily, because obviously that's where most of my experience lies, so I can translate that a little bit better across, so we can have a little look at what the developers thinking behind how the game will actually play is. So with regards to some of the factions that I have been sent the names of are the Elves of Osiriand, the Exiles of Finarfin, the Orcs of Thangorodrim, the House of Feanor, and the House of Fingolfin. So obviously a lot of elves, orcs, and when you consider that this is the first stage, obviously that does make a great deal of sense. Now, it's probably a good idea here to go ahead and mention that the first age of Tolkien's works is not particularly my area of expertise. I do have a very general overview of what goes on, but certainly on the level of most people, I would be considered definitely a bit of a noob when it comes to the lore. But I am also quite aware that with all of the factions that I just mentioned, I would imagine that scale is going to be quite important here, because I am aware that quite a lot of the battles that happened in the first stage were absolutely enormous in terms of scale. One such example, which I'm quite familiar with, of course, would be the Battle of Unnumbered Tears, because it was a recreation of this which I did for my 1,000 subscriber special back when. And obviously a battle of this size and scope, you can only really have a representation of it in something like Medieval 2, because the sheer amount of people that would be on the field would make any PC cry, even on a game as old as Medieval 2, and obviously the game itself does not allow for the amount of numbers that would truly be necessary for something like that to happen. But I would imagine that part of the developers' thoughts when they're going through most of these factions is, again, that sense of almost the mythic aspect of the first age in many ways. It's sort of like the age long ago where everyone was stronger and the battles were massive and all of that sort of thing. You know, most fantasy tends to have that, where everything in ancient times was like better and everyone was stronger. And I would imagine that they're going to try and capture a bit of that with some of these factions as well. Obviously, there's going to be more than the factions that I just mentioned as well. Obviously, these are just like the initial ones that they're going to be working on, I would imagine, and more will follow on from that. And I look forward to seeing how this develops, because, as I said, more variety is always a good thing, whether that be within individual submods or a completely new one like this. I'm going to be quite interested to see what they make for these new factions as well, what sort of new units, what sort of new unit models. It's an opportunity for a lot of people to be quite creative, as well as bring some of Tolkien's words to life on the screen. Speaking about the meta changes, however, I do have a little document that I've been given to sort of very briefly outline the thinking behind some of these things. So, for example, the damage aspect of your infantry is going to be shifted away from the spears and pikes. At least that is the idea, to make them more defensively based units. That is still what they are in Reforged, to be fair, as well. But particularly at the higher levels, both of those types of units can still be very effective killing machines on foot. And it will be sort of transferred over to axes and swords and that sort of thing to really... That will certainly incentivize bringing more of those kinds of units, because as it is, that is why you would bring them in Reforged as well, but they do have very distinct weaknesses in comparison to just bringing a block of spears and pikes, which you can sort of hedgehog it up with and make it very difficult for cavalry. Also, just a few other things, like all foot skirmishers are going to have boosted range, at least that is the idea. Not by much, you know, it does say just plus 10 base range for all foot skirmishers, which is not a huge amount, but it is still significant, because it does sort of infer that skirmishers are going to be made just a little bit more effective across the board with a little bit more range and so on. From the look of things as well, it looks as though they intend to make elephants a little bit more of a tour de force by making all of the bonuses against them just that little bit less effective, which I'm honestly in favour of, because elephant type units in Reforged are potentially very good, but also the risk that they incur is not really worth it most of the time. Like chariots can, because they're fast, but anyone who's tried to use stuff like the Mumakil often end up disappointed, because there's so many ways to effectively deal with them. So here they're going to be made just a little bit more useful overall. There are a few things obviously which will still get bonuses against them, such as like really high tier cavalry and so on, but it should make them a little bit better. And then obviously there are going to be other types of units like swords, knives, scimitars, all of which get their own little bonuses to melee defense. But again, I won't go into numbers too much, because all of those things can change during development, and I'd be very surprised if none of them changed. You know, that's just how development works. But yeah, enough of this sort of very vague talk about things. But overall, I would suggest that it's going to be, I think, a little bit more focused on the lore side of things, this mod, I would imagine, just based on the subject matter it's dealing with in the Silmarillion. And I do feel as though the two perspectives that anyone who's developed on DAC and anyone who's developed on Reforged will bring to the table should make it a very good thing indeed. I think that, you know, the marriage of those two viewpoints should culminate in something which should do the Silmarillion justice, I feel. So that's pretty much it. Just a very brief video, this one, just to let you know that this is something which is in the works. Obviously, J Monster is, I believe he is the one that you would sort of speak of as like the de facto project lead. And that's good, because I feel as though the experience he gained from really helping drag the Reforged patch 0.97 across the line is exactly what this sort of thing needs to get off the ground. And I will look forward to this with great interest, to be honest with you, because ever since Reforged, there hasn't really been another major branch of the submod. Everything has just been sort of increasing onto DAC and Reforged together. So this is something a little bit different, and I do feel as though, again, for any of those lore buffs out there, the first age, it's a very special place in people's hearts, I think. And so I think a lot of people are going to be quite interested to see how that translates across to Total War. Of course, don't get your hopes up for like certain things, like the dragon who's like the size of a mountain. That obviously won't be in the game, because Medieval 2 will just not be able to handle that sort of thing. But the style, the battles, the lore of the first stage, these are the things which I'm really looking forward to seeing in action, and I hope you are too. So yeah, I hope you found this informative regarding what's going on the development side of things in all things Third Age, regardless of the submod at the moment. And I hope you'll join me for whatever is next, which I do not know what battle it will be. I do have a big Moria siege coming up, which I do intend to do, but I'm not sure when I'm going to be able to record that one. Other than that, I do have several RP battles which I can also be getting on with as well. So there's plenty of content coming up. Obviously, again, it's a bit of a weird time for me at the moment, so getting videos out in a regular fashion is something I'm still trying to do. We'll see how successful I am at that. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.